Hello. I thought it would be helpful to put some of what we've covered in the last 4 programs into some perspective to enhance our understanding of relations between China and the United States moving forward. Just to refresh, 4 weeks ago we talked about currency and the economic rivalry between China and the United States, or as Neil Ferguson put it, the symbiosis between China and the United States, with us as consumer and China as producer. And then we moved on to a discussion of whether the Chinese military should be viewed as a threat or as bravado or as just something normal in the course of human affairs. And then we had a session on political change and the new leadership that's coming forward in China and what that might portend for us. That was then followed with the presentation of 2 personalities, friends of mine, but Gordon Wu, who I mentioned in an earlier program, and Joe Nye. And Gordy showed that the Chinese leadership were not ideologues as their Soviet predecessors have been. You'll recall Gordy's account of how he went to Deng Xiaoping in 1979 with a proposal to build a superhighway from Hong Kong to Guangzhou, and that Deng and he worked out an agreement that led to what's known as communism by other means or something of that sort. But they worked out a 1-page agreement, though, to cover the deal concerning the superhighway. And when Gordy asked Deng what they would do if a dispute arose, Deng simply wrote into the agreement, "Disputes will be resolved amicably." And I think that's very significant for understanding the Chinese culture and the Chinese way of looking at things. They like to resolve differences and problems amicably, and they bring great patience to that process. I also suspect that it didn't hurt that Gordy was Chinese, that he was ethnically Chinese, and so he and Deng were 2 Chinese leaders meeting together to discuss the future of China and what would be best for the Chinese people, what would be best to preserve Chinese civilization, what would be best for Chinese culture. Joe Nye then talked about how both the center of power in the world and the nature of power are changing. The center of power is moving from a transatlantic alliance between Europe and the United States to a trans-Pacific arrangement. Still unclear whether that will evolve to be an alliance or what it will be, between the Asian nations and the United States and Europe around the Pacific Rim. Europe, of course, remains a tremendous force, and it's part of the American orbit, but it has great financial problems at this time. Joe also talked about how the nature of power is changing as increased communication and interaction among people at the popular level have diffused power and diffused information dramatically. What can we take away from this? We have a choice. We can, as Americans, either treat China as a rival or as a partner. Partnership calls for greater understanding and acceptance of both our similarities and our differences. Partnership imputes goodwill to the partner. It is not antagonistic and it is not fearful. Partners trust each other. Our relationship with China has not yet reached that level at which we completely trust each other and understand each other and recognize our similarities as much as our differences. Rivalry, on the other hand, leads to containment and either dominance or a balance of power. This is the traditional concept of great power diplomacy ever since the 1648 Treaty of Westphalia. You'll recall that the Treaty of Westphalia ended the 30 Years' War, which had been a conflict between the powers of Protestantism and Catholicism, and the war dragged on for 30 years, so you can tell that this was kind of an interminable war, and nothing was resolved. So finally the powers got together and agreed to the principle of whoever rules gets to determine the religion, and that evolved over time to the modern concept of non-intervention by foreign governments in the internal affairs of other governments. In other words, governments are free to do in their own country whatever they want. If they want to impose Catholicism, they can impose Catholicism. If they want to impose Protestantism, they can impose Protestantism. We leave that to the governments. Now, that is beginning to change, but before we get there, great power politics is sometimes called realpolitik. We tend to give it its intellectual origins in Machiavelli's The Prince, and it was acted out with the greatest success by Bismarck. Respect for rivals in great power politics leads to a diplomatic balance among equals that keeps the rivals safe from doing harm, but also keeps them at a distance. In our time, however, the fear of weapons of mass destruction, atomic bomb, chemical weapons, biological weapons, have changed the diplomatic dance of the balance of power, and we have yet to really fully evolve a new diplomacy that can adequately substitute for the non-intervention philosophy that came out of the Treaty of Westphalia. Today, we view Iran as a rival, and we also view Russia as a rival, though to a lesser degree than Iran. We partner with Canada and Britain, and other nations fall between these extremes. Our relationship with China has grown more textured, and that makes it difficult to maintain. People in the great democracies, and you have to, in a democratic society, you have to be concerned with what popular sentiment is, and popular sentiment doesn't deal well with complex, intricate problems that require deep deliberation for their resolution. People like to see things in clear, simple terms. And so this textured relationship that we have with this strange government, which is communist and yet it's not communist, becomes difficult for people to grasp and difficult for people to know what their reaction should be to developments from China. We recognize, as we've seen in this program, that the Chinese people are very much like ourselves. They want prosperity. They want their children to have a better life than they've had. They want the same things that we want. But sometimes the politics, the things that appeal to the people when put forward by their leaders, can shift that balance. And there are political forces in both the U.S. and in China who are looking for advantage over the other in this context. China has its doves and it has its hawks, and the United States has its doves and it has its hawks. It still remains to be seen how the United States will deal with China moving forward, and it's hard to get a handle on just how the diplomacy is being played out. Clearly, the United States is wary of China, and the Chinese are sensitive to American criticism of Chinese government internal social regulation. In our next excerpt, Susan Shirk from the University of California at San Diego, UCSD, will give some comments on her view of China today. This is germane since Professor Shirk served in the Bill Clinton administration as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of East Asia and Pacific Affairs with responsibility for China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Mongolia. She graduated from Mount Holyoke, got her master's degree from UC Berkeley, and her PhD from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, a graduate school odyssey that I've found fascinating. Professor Shirk will be commenting on the new media, the context in which he'll be speaking involved a man who was a co-founder of Twitter, so you get a sense of what's going on. And she's talking about what Joe Nye referred to as this new communication among the people of the world and how that is changing the political dialogue in China. Let's turn to Susan Shirk.
Good afternoon. It's once again a great pleasure for me to welcome the Foreign Minister. I've had the honor of working with him on a very regular basis ever since I became Secretary of State. We are preparing diligently for the upcoming state visit by President Hu Jintao. It's very much anticipated and looked forward to. And both the Minister and I feel a great sense of responsibility to ensure that it continues the positive, cooperative, comprehensive relationship between our two countries. So again, Minister Yang, welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for your very warm remarks and very sincere remarks as well. And we would like to thank President Obama, thank Secretary Clinton, and thank all my American colleagues for working so hard with the Chinese side for the preparation of the state visit to be paid by President Hu Jintao to the United States later this month. This visit will occur against the ever-evolving international situation, and it will happen during the first year of the second decade of this great new century, and will happen on the 40th anniversary of the opening of China-US relationship. I think China-US relationship is on the right track. We are confronted with common challenges, and we are enjoying common opportunities. It is in the best interest of China, the United States, and the world for us to continue to work together so that our relationship will bring more benefits to both our two peoples and to the people of the world. I believe that the preparation is proceeding very well, and my job here is to do my little part for a successful visit. And I thank the American government, particularly the President and Madam Secretary and Mr. Donilon, for their warm hospitality, and let's all work hard for an even more beautiful tomorrow of China-US relationship. Thank you, Madam Secretary.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Will there be more China bashing?
Let me say that the bilateral relations between China and the European Union are very good. But still we can do it better. And we are trying to do with these meetings is to construct solid and more profound relationship. Today we have had the opportunity to talk about that, about the bilateral relations, but also about how to look at the world as much as possible with the same eyes, with the same wavelength.
Thank you, Mr. Solana. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to see you here, friends from the media. Let me say that today I've had a very good discussion, very constructive discussion with Mr. Solana. This is my first trip to EU headquarters as the Chinese foreign minister. China attaches a great deal of importance to this relationship. We have also taken note of the fact that the Iranian side has also put forward its proposal. We hope that both sides will have earnest dialogue for the resumption of the talks. This issue is a very important issue, and it will be in the interest of the region and in the world that this issue, the appropriate a good settlement is found for this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
On Wednesday, India's Foreign Minister S.M. Krishna landed in Beijing to meet with his Chinese counterpart, Chinese Foreign Minister Yang Jiechi, as part of a 3-day visit to China. The meeting between the two foreign ministers covered China's veto of the UN Security Council resolution regarding continued conflict in Syria. They also spoke about the U.S. resolution to restrict oil trade with Iran, as well as relations with Afghanistan. Krishna continued his trip after the meeting by inaugurating the new Indian embassy in Beijing.
By the end of 1991, the 74-year-old Soviet Union became history. "25 days after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Deng Xiaoping made his famous tour of southern China. In Shenzhen, a pioneer in the economic reform and opening up, Deng stressed the importance of seizing the opportunity to develop despite the international instability. Deng put forward guiding principles to observe and analyze the international situation, primarily characterized by making contributions without showing off. The Cold War ended, leaving the United States as the world's only superpower. America soon realized that it no longer needed to cooperate with China to contain the Soviet Union. After the political unrest in Beijing in 1989, the US responded severely with 16 measures covering trade, investment, immigration and high-level exchanges. Other Western countries followed suit with their own sanctions. In 1995, relations with America deteriorated rapidly because of the then Taiwan leader Lee Teng-hui's visit to the United States. Despite soured ties with the US, China's diplomacy did not slide into a slowdown. Japan was the first in the Western bloc to re-establish the exchange of officials in 1990. The same year, China started diplomatic ties with Saudi Arabia, which ended diplomatic ties with Taiwan. In August 1990, China re-established relations with Indonesia after a 23-year break. Soon after, China established diplomatic relations with Singapore. In August 1992, China forged diplomatic ties with South Korea. And in 1997, when the Asian financial crisis hit, China said it would maintain the value of its currency. The move played a stabilizing role in the economic turmoil, giving its Asian neighbors more time to recover.
After 1989, the mainstream of Western opinion was that China would collapse soon. The Soviet Union collapsed and the Eastern European countries changed, so China would not survive for long. But the turning point was the 1997 Asian financial crisis. The world saw China as a responsible country, because it kept its word not to devalue its currency, and also as an economic engine because it maintained economic growth by increasing domestic spending.
The US was watching, and it began to change its policies towards China. In 1997, President Jiang Zemin paid a formal visit to the US, the first by a Chinese leader in a dozen years. During Bill Clinton's first term, China-US relations were strained, but in his second term, he extended a warm welcome to Jiang. But not all Americans felt the same way. Students at Harvard University are famous for not mincing their words. Jiang Zemin was scheduled to give a speech there, and many were concerned it would prove an awkward experience.
Before the your president came here, I warned him about going to Harvard University. I don't go to Harvard University because I don't want to be harassed by students.
After Jiang's speech, a student asked him what he thought of the campus protests outside.
To the protests that you have heard.
虽然我已经71岁了，但是呢，我的耳朵还是很尖锐。那么刚才我在演讲的时候，我就听到外面的高音喇叭的声音。那么但是呢，我想我唯一的办法就是我的声音要比他还高。
He went there. He answered the questions very well. He showed a good sense of humor, he showed discipline, and it turned into a big success. I always apologize to the president for having not had enough faith.
President Jiang took with him to the US his own aspirations. Behind him was a country getting more confident on the global stage. July 1st, 1997 was a special day for all the Chinese around the world. After some 150 years of colonial rule, Hong Kong finally returned to China. The world then saw the realization of Deng Xiaoping's bold idea of one country, two systems. By the end of 1999, China resumed exercise of sovereignty over Macau. It was a proud moment as 400 years of foreign control on Chinese soil ended. China was heading for a new century and a new era. In the past century, the country has witnessed great changes. Once a semi-colonial and semi-feudal nation, now a socialist country with Chinese characteristics. Once a closed-door nation, now a country opening up to the outside world. Once a poor nation, now a country drawing world attention for its economic strength. China was moving forward, mature and confident, and so was its diplomacy. In the new millennium, China is looking forward, determined to do even more for world peace and development.
Well, a rich and varied culture and the pain of colonial rule and foreign aggression, national pride and humiliation, together with geographical, cultural and ethnic factors, have all helped shape the Chinese view of its role as a country. More importantly, how China sees itself determines what kind of part it's played and what it will play on the global stage, thus determining its foreign diplomatic policies. That's the end of the first part of this special edition on World Insight on the 60 years of Chinese diplomacy. Much more the same next week, so join us again for that, and we'll bring you Chinese diplomacy in the new millennium. I'm James Chow in Beijing. From me and my colleagues here, thanks for joining us. We'll see you again.